Alright guys, in this video we're going to be looking at finding the inverse of a quadratic. If you take a look at number 1 here, we got y equals 3x squared plus 9. This is a quadratic. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the inverse of this quadratic. Now when we talk about inverses, we're talking about taking the x and the y and switching them. So I'm going to start by rewriting the equation as x equals 3y squared plus 9. So notice the first step in finding the inverse is to take your x and y and switch them. At this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to solve for y. I want to isolate that y. So I'm going to start by subtracting 9 from both sides, which means I now have x minus 9 equals 3y squared. The next thing I'm going to do is divide everything by 3. Now keep in mind the number in front of the x is a 1. So when I divide 1 by 3, I end up with a 1/3 x. A negative 9 divided by 3 would be a negative 3. And over here, of course, I'm left with y squared. Alright, I've got one more thing I need to do. If I want y by itself, I need to do the opposite of squaring. And the opposite of squaring is square root. So I have the square root of 1/3 x minus 3 is equal to y. Now, the notation we're going to use for inverses is going to be f of x with a little negative 1 here. That implies that we're talking inverses. And that inverse was the square root of 1/3 x minus 3. So this right here is the inverse of this quadratic. Alright, let's try another one. Again, we're trying to find the inverse of the quadratic. So we're going to start by taking our x and our y and switching them. So the equation now becomes x equals y squared minus 6. That's our first step. Now what we want to do is we want to isolate the y, get the y by itself. So I'm going to start by adding 6 to both sides. So I have x plus 6 equals y squared. Now I want to do the opposite of squaring. If I want y by itself, the opposite of squaring is to take the square root of both sides. And if I take the square root of both sides, I end up with the square root of x plus 6 equals y. Notice at this point I have isolated that y. I've got y by itself. The only thing is I'm going to use the proper notation. And the notation for inverses are f of x with the little negative 1 there equals the square root of x plus 6. So again, this equation is the inverse of this quadratic. Okay, example number 3, we're still looking for the inverse of the quadratic. So we're still going to start by taking your x and your y and switching them. So our new equation becomes x equals 1/2 y squared plus 3. Now we're going to isolate that y. We're going to start by subtracting 3. So I have x minus 3 equals 1/2 y squared. Now what I need to do is take care of that 1/2. And what we're going to do is we're going to multiply both sides by the reciprocal. So I'm going to multiply this side by 2, which is the reciprocal of 1/2. And we're also going to multiply this side by 2. So if I multiply the left side by 2, 2 times x is 2x. 2 times a negative 3 is a negative 6. And of course over here when I multiply 1/2 times 2, I'm left with a 1y squared. I'm almost there. I almost got y by itself. Next thing I need to do is take care of that square. The opposite of squaring something is to take the square root of it. So if I take the square root of both sides, I end up with the square root of 2x minus 6 equals y. At this point I am done, but I'm going to use the proper notation. So the notation for inverse is going to be this right here, f of x with your little negative 1. And the square root of 2x minus 6. So this is the inverse of this quadratic. Alright, let's continue looking at finding inverses of quadratic. The next couple of equations here are going to be a little different. We're still going to start by taking your x and the y and switching them. So the new equation is going to become x equals y plus 2 squared plus 3. Alright, so let's see here. First thing we're going to do is take care of this plus 3. And the opposite of adding 3 is subtracting 3. So I've got x minus 3 equals y plus 2 squared. Alright, so now what I need to do is take care of these parentheses. Notice what they're doing to the parentheses is they're squaring. And the opposite of squaring something is to take the square root. So I'm going to come over here and take the square root of both sides, which means I now have the square root of x minus 3. And when I take the square root of this y plus 2 squared, I'm left with a y plus 2. The squared and the square root cancel each other out. Alright, so at this point I'm almost done. I almost have that y by itself. The last thing I'm going to do is come over here and subtract 2. Now we need to be careful here because a common mistake is to go ahead and try and subtract that negative 3 minus 2. Can't do that. And that's because that minus 3 is underneath our radical or underneath our square root. So that minus 2 that we're subtracting is going to stay on the outside of the square root or our radical, which means we end up with the square root of x minus 3 minus 2. But again, I'm going to use the proper notation. And that notation we're using for inverses is this. And the equation is x minus 3, or square root of x minus 3, minus 2. Again, that minus 2 is on the outside of our radical. So this is the inverse of this quadratic. Alright, let's try another one. Let's start by taking our x and y and switching those. Alright, now what I'm going to do is get that y by itself. We're going to start by subtracting 2. So I've got x minus 2 is equal to y minus 5 squared. Now I need to get rid of those parentheses. And they're squaring those parentheses, so what we're going to do is the opposite of squaring, which is to square root. So I now have the square root of x minus 2 equals y minus 5. Again, the square root and the square are canceling each other out. Now what I need to do is take care of that 5. The opposite of subtracting 5 is to add 5. But again, guys, make sure you don't add that 5 with that negative 2. That negative 2 or minus 2 is underneath the radical, and we need to keep it there. The plus 5 should be on the outside of the radical. Therefore, we end up with the equation, the square root of x minus 2 plus 5 equals y. Well, let's go ahead and use the proper notation. And the notation for inverse would be this right here. Square root of x minus 2 plus 5. So this equation is the inverse of this quadratic. Alright, let's try one last example. Again, to start off with, we're going to need to take the x and y and switch those two. That's what an inverse is. We're now going to go ahead and move the 4 to the other side. We're going to add the 4 to both sides. So now we've got x plus 4 equals y minus 6 squared. We need to get rid of those parentheses. So the opposite of squaring something is to square root it, which means I now have the square root of x plus 4 equals y minus 6. Again, the square root and the square are canceling each other out. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is take care of that minus 6. And the opposite of subtracting 6 is adding 6. But don't add that 6 and 4. Keep those two separate. So we've got the square root of x plus 4. And that plus 6 is going to stay on the outside of our radical. So let's go ahead and use the proper notation. We're going to use f of x with our little negative 1 exponent equals the square root of x plus 4 plus 6. So this equation is the inverse of this quadratic.